By now, you've probably heard about the exciting mid-credit scene following the movie Venom. We got to see a glimpse of Woody Harrelson portraying serial killer Cletus Cassidy, and Marvel fans know what that means. In many ways, Carnage is the stronger symbiote, but we'll talk about some things he just can't do. Before we go head-to-head with Carnage versus Venom, make sure to click that subscribe button for more videos from CBR. Then ring that gray bell to join our notification squad and get the latest updates. Now let's get started. Heroics. This one may sound simple, but the fact is that Venom is a hero, while Carnage is a villain through and through. Sure, Venom is pretty much the definition of an anti-hero, but the word hero is still involved. During the movie Venom, we saw the titular symbiote come to Earth with dreams of conquering it, only to realize it's actually a pretty cool place. He gets perhaps way too close to Eddie Brock and decides he could get used to the whole only eating some of the people some of the time thing. On the other hand, we have Carnage, who has all of Venom's bad qualities and none of his good ones. And to make him an even more insidious character, he's also inextricably linked to a horrific serial killer named Cletus Cassidy. Don't get us wrong, Venom is far from an angel, but he does manage to save the day from time to time. For a long time, Venom and Spider-Man were mortal enemies, but eventually the two decided to live and let live. When it comes to ways to take out a superhero, capitulation is really a criminally underrated method, and it's one that a character like Carnage will never be able to utilize. Sanity. We all know that Venom isn't going to win any awards for most well-adjusted being in the galaxy, but keep in mind that he is an alien from another planet. Sure, he's a fan of ripping people's heads off, but he wants the bodies and heads put neatly in separate piles. Many of Venom's, let's say, unique outlooks on life are easily explained by the fact that he's from an alien planet. Like any other visitor, there's a bit of a learning curve, and a completely different set of morals and customs to learn. Although Venom was hurt by Spider-Man's rejection, he did form an emotional bond with Peter Parker. Before he left him, he moved Peter's unconscious body to safety as a final act of kindness. And then on the other hand, we have Carnage, who is not at all capable of that type of empathy. The reason he syncs up so well with Cletus is because they're both absolutely insane. Venom is capable of playing it cool, biding his time and forging useful alliances with other characters. Carnage may be physically stronger, but in terms of mental fortitude, Venom definitely has him beat. Not that it's saying much when they're both bloodthirsty aliens, but at least it's something. Home. In the movie Venom, we learned that the alien symbiotes come from another planet, and they don't appreciate being called parasites. Their real name is the Clintar, although they're more commonly referred to as the symbiotes. These symbiotic extraterrestrials have been around since the universe began, and were created by the deity Null to fight against other creatures. Eventually, Null was defeated by Thor, and the Clintar were left to figure out their own life paths. Many symbiotes sought hosts who could give their lives meaning, and ended up acquiring the traits of their hosts as a result. Sure, some retained their evil nature, but others learned how to be kind, or at the very least not outright vicious. We know Venom remembers his home planet and is familiar with other members of his species, but this is a backstory Carnage just doesn't have. He doesn't hail from his home world and has no real connection to that life outside of his relationship to Venom. This life and his sinister merging to Cletus Cassidy is all that he knows and all he's ever known. It might actually be a little sad if he wasn't such a murderous psychopath. Partnership. If you've seen the movie Venom, or if you've read the comics, you know that Eddie Brock and Venom are just better together. The Marvel movie starts out with evil Carlton Drake realizing it's harder than he thought to find the perfect host for an alien symbiote. Venom remarks later in the movie that he would be loath to let Eddie Brock go because he's such a perfect host. But at various times in the movie, he can and does let Eddie go. After being forcibly separated from Eddie during the movie, we saw Venom take over a dog and Eddie's ex-girlfriend, Anne Weying. But this is an option Carnage doesn't have. When he fuses with Cletus Cassidy in the comics, he actually enters his bloodstream and becomes one with the killer at a cellular level. Separate. Not only does Venom have the benefit of two minds, he's able to separate from Eddie Brock from time to time. In the comics, we see him merge with many other people, including Spider-Man, Flash Thompson, Lee Price, and Tel-Kar. This not only means he can access different powers and abilities, but it's a huge tool when it comes to survival. Cletus Cassidy and Carnage are so intertwined that they're both weakened terribly when separated. Sure, we've seen Carnage merge with other characters from time to time, but he's at his best and strongest when he's fused with Cletus. In the comics, we saw Venom break the bond between Cletus and his symbiote, and absorb the symbiote back into his body. This means Cletus is just one of the many dime a dozen maniacs now, and he isn't happy about it. He proceeds to go even crazier than we thought was possible once stripped of his powers. Cletus paints his body red and goes on a rampage, desperate for his symbiote-infused powers to come back. Big screen. When it comes to Marvel characters, it's no secret that Venom has been a fan favorite for a long time, but there were quite a few complications when it came to him hitting the big screen. Of course, there's the whole Sony, Marvel, Disney thing, where great comic characters ended up owned by different studios who are now converging. And for a long time, it seemed pretty impossible to have a Venom movie without Spider-Man. After all, the reason Venom has his signature powers is because of the time he spent fused with Peter Parker. But as we all know, they were able to move past that little hiccup and bring Venom to the big screen. And to the surprise of many, the movie was actually good. The warped Spider-Man symbol was removed from Venom's chest, and his powers were just attributed to the fact that he's an alien. But another reason which gave fans pause when it came to seeing Venom in theaters was the fact that it was rated PG-13. Comic book fans know that Venom is a brutal character, and that's part of the reason he's so appealing. Creating a PG-13 Venom movie meant toning down the graphic violence and language, which is a huge part of the character. While it was done, we can't see Carnage being able to get his own standalone movie. He's just too violently insane to ever be corralled into a PG-13 film. Fans. Comic book fans know that Spider-Man's costume has changed a ton over the years. In fact, one of our favorite characters was once supposed to be nothing more than a costume change for Peter Parker. Originally, the symbiote first showed up in an issue of The Amazing Spider-Man number 252, back in 1984. But he wouldn't make his debut as Venom until 1998, during The Amazing Spider-Man number 300. That was when the symbiote bonded with Eddie Brock, and grew into much more than just a fashion statement for Spider-Man. The reason Venom stuck around so long is because he has such a rabid fan base. People love Venom, and he regularly appears on lists of best comic book characters. While Carnage is a great villain who certainly has his admirers, he has never risen to the level that Venom has. In fact, Carnage was originally intended to replace Venom, which is why he's essentially Venom 2.0. The original idea was that the symbiote would fuse with other people until eventually settling on Cletus Cassidy. But fans couldn't get enough of Eddie Brock and Venom together. Spider-Man. By now, you know all about the relationship between Venom and Carnage, but now we're going to talk about the relationship between Venom and Spider-Man in the comic books. Eddie Brock and Venom both came to despise Spider-Man on their own, and that hate is what drew them together in the first place. In the comics, Eddie Brock was a journalist who falsely identified someone as the killer, Sin Eater. When Spider-Man unmasked the right person, it destroyed Eddie's career and sent him into a severe downward spiral. Meanwhile, the symbiote had been faithfully serving as Spider-Man's loyal costume before the web-slinger ultimately rejected it. Because Eddie Brock and the symbiote are two of the few beings on the planet who doesn't love Spider-Man, they were a perfect match. But eventually, Spider-Man and Venom make an uneasy peace with one another. They not only let bygones be bygones, but they team up together from time to time to stop bad guys, including Carnage. We know Venom is an anti-hero, but he does have the ability to team up with other heroes when the situation calls for it. This is an option which Carnage will never have, because he is all-out evil. Individuality. There are many reasons to love Venom, but one of the major ones is that he really stands out. Sure, he drew many things from Spider-Man, but they're about as different as two people can be personality-wise. Venom and Eddie Brock may share a body, but they're two very different people and personalities. Cletus may remind you of another infamous villain you're probably very familiar with. He may be from the DC universe, but the Joker is known as one of the best villains of all time. Although he belongs in Batman's rogue gallery, his influence can be seen in many comic books, including the Venom series. During the mid-credit scene in the Venom movie, we saw Cletus acting like a stereotypical mentally deranged serial killer, despite his statements to the contrary. Carnage was meant to be another version of Venom, while Cletus was meant to be just like the Joker. While these characters are great, they lack the individuality that Venom and Eddie Brock have. Magic. Venom and Carnage do have a lot of things in common, including their weaknesses. Even if you've just seen the movie Venom, you probably remember that the alien symbiotes have two weaknesses. They can survive massive impacts, death-defying falls, and a hail of bullets, but they are able to be defeated. The first thing the symbiotes can't stand are sound waves of a certain level. It's enough to make a symbiote lose control of its host, or perish altogether if it goes on for too long. The second weakness of the symbiotes is good old-fashioned fire. It may seem simple, but it's an effective way to get rid of any alien symbiotes plaguing you. Unless you're Carnage, that is. That's right, while Venom and Carnage are both susceptible to fire, Carnage is no longer vulnerable to sound waves. This may sound like a huge advantage, but he had to swap that out for another huge weakness. During Carnage Volume 2, number 15, we saw Carnage facing off against the Elder God Chithan. Now, in general, facing off against these kinds of entities tends to end up incredibly bad. But when you're a psychotic villain like Carnage, you don't really have much to lose. He ends up being empowered by Chthon's magic and loses his vulnerability to sound waves. But he gains a weakness to chthonic magic, against which Venom is much stronger. Those were just some of the things Venom could do that Carnage cannot. Who's your favorite symbiote in the Venom series? Let us know who you cheer for in the comment section below, and then click that subscribe button so you don't miss any videos from CBR. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.